Hey crew, before we get started today, I wanted to let you know, just a note, this episode was recorded back in June of this year, so when we're talking about Alan's book coming out in October, it did. It came out in October. It's called Allies, and it's been very successful. If you want to pick it up, you can at your local bookstore, as Alan recommends, but if you're not going to do that, then I say get it on Amazon and use the link that I've got in the show notes when you buy Alan's book, Allies, from Amazon from that link, or when you buy anything from Amazon using that link. A percentage of that transaction, a small part, comes back to us here at the show at no extra cost to you and helps keep the Warp Core lit here. It's a great way to support the show, and we'd appreciate it. If you're not going to buy it at a local bookstore, buy it through Amazon and help us out. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's always fun talking to Alan and having him on again, and we talk about really a great pair of episodes from DS9 and a pivotal pair of episodes from essentially the midpoint of DS9 or close to it. So enjoy the show, and with that, let's get underway.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I want to know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I want to know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy. Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and I too have been described as floral, musky, and spicy. Joining me again on this episode is New York Times bestselling author Alan Gratz. Alan has written over a dozen historical and fantasy novels for young readers. He's also the author of The Assassination Game, a Starfleet Academy young adult novel set in the Kelvin Universe. His new novel, Allies, comes out on October 15th and tells the story of young resistance fighters and American soldiers in World War II as they fight to survive German-occupied France on D-Day. Alan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Permission to come aboard.
Permission granted. Good to have you back aboard. Today we'll be talking about Improbable Cause and The Die is Cast, the 20th and 21st episodes of the third season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Star Trek presents a future where humanity has achieved peace and equilibrium. Every week on TOS and TNG, we see heroic eidolons of egalitarianism compare their society to those of other beings and find them wanting. And the USS Enterprise, whatever the model letter, was the literal vehicle through which those stories were told. But when DS9 debuted in 1993, it presented a stationary setting that was at the crossroads of two cultures, and audiences were introduced to a cast of characters who existed outside of the Federation's embrace. Ones who eschewed and in some cases openly scoffed at the benevolent values of Starfleet. One such character was Garrick, a plain, simple tailor whose pleasant and unassuming facade was a mask for his deadly skills, his remorseless philosophy, and the deep agony he felt after being exiled from his homeworld. It may be the human truths that Trek explores that make us like the franchise, but it's the lies that keep us coming back, especially the lies. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. But first, Alan, as an author who has many, many fans and who has spent a lot of time traveling to schools and meeting students, you must get a lot of fan mail. Do you respond to fans?
I do. So at the beginning of my career, when I was less popular or less well-known, it was much easier to write back to kids. So, and the funny thing is, of course, my fan mail comes from middle schoolers. So sometimes it's a class assignment. Sometimes it's like, hey, we had to read your book in my class and we had to write a letter. So here's my letter. You know, those aren't great. But I still tried to write back to those kids anyway. And the best ones, though, are like, I never finished a book before and I picked up one of your books and I loved it. Or I've read this book 6 times now. The kids who write to you because they're really passionate about you and your books. And you know, we live in an era, you've talked about this many times on the show with other guests in particular. We live in an era where with social media, content creators, for lack of a better general word for it, are incredibly approachable. You can find the people who made your favorite show, the people who wrote your favorite book, and you can write to them. And I get a lot of emails from kids. I don't get as much on Facebook as a person who writes for teenagers or for adults would get. because a lot of kids aren't on Facebook, or if they are, they're just sharing stupid pictures with their friends. But they find me, and I've gotten more and more letters, almost to the point where it's really hard to keep up with it. But I do like to write back. The kids who write me the super personal letters, I really try to write something very personal back to them. The rest of them, I've ended up doing sort of a Mad Lib author letter back, where it's like, hey, thanks for reading blank, and I have on the back side, they fill in all the things, and on the front, they can go through and read this sort of letter. I call it the letter-o-matic. But when you write for middle schoolers and you send back a Mad Lib, that's probably, I hope, a pretty good thing.
And I'm sure your fans appreciate it.
Yeah.
Your upcoming novel, Allies, is already #1 on the children's military fiction list on Amazon, and it has to be one of your most ambitious stories yet. And it follows 4 characters, is that right?
Yeah, actually more than that. I think it's more like, 7 characters. And it took me a moment to remember, because my original draft had something like, 24 characters. It was kind of out of control. And through the editing process, knocked it down to 7 characters. But yeah, they're, as you said in your intro to me, and I appreciate that, it's resistance fighters, it's soldiers coming up on the beach, it's people who found themselves in the middle of D-Day and threw in to help the soldiers on the beaches. It's the paratroopers, it's the medics who were there to work on the beaches. I try to tell many, many different perspectives on that day, all from the Allied side. I had considered in an earlier draft doing some German perspectives, like the movie and book Longest Day did, but eventually just winnowed it down to those 7 sort of Allied point of views, trying to show the number of people involved in this. But also, one of the things I hadn't seen with a lot of books about D-Day in particular was the way that marginalized people were a part of D-Day. We often see the white dudes running up the beach, and that was a huge part of it. But there were African American soldiers at D-Day. There were women who were serving in support roles, but also on the beaches as nurses right after the fact, and certainly women fighting in the resistance. There were Jews in the American army who were suffering persecution and prejudice while they were fighting to liberate concentration camps. There were Muslim fighters in the French resistance, because the French they had colonized Algeria, and as a part of getting the Algerians to help them fight, they said, "We'll give you your independence if you help us fight." And they thought, well, we got a better chance of getting that from France than with Germany, and so the Algerians threw in with their French overlords, if you will, and then after the war, France said, "Yeah, we were just kidding," and that led to a really bloody revolution in Algeria. But again, what I was trying to do is not only tell the story of D-Day, but also show a number of different people whose stories are often not told when we hear World War II narratives like this.
Yeah. It's almost like it's a world war.
It's like it included everybody. It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a popular setting. D-Day in particular is a popular setting. So I'm guessing you found a lot of research material, but how did you coordinate these multiple storylines all working together?
Yeah, what I tried to do was work through it. Whenever I'm writing about a particular moment in time, I can use the chronology of it. So I can say, who were the first people there? And really, right after midnight, you had paratroopers dropping in to try and take over key bridges and to take out particular gun emplacements on the beaches, knowing that 6 hours later that there were going to be soldiers hitting the beach in those spots. So really what I did was as I researched, as I read many different books about D-Day, I just kept a running chronology and said, who were the first people there? What happened next? What happened next? And then trying to pick out the best stories, the most important stories of that day from those different times and those different actions.
We've talked before on the show about your Kelvin Universe novel, The Assassination Game. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm probably going to check it out soon. I'm preparing to tape a live show at a convention coming up where we'll be putting Star Trek 2009 and the Kelvin Universe as an institution on trial. Not with prejudice necessarily. It's just that many people, myself included, are not real big fans of the Abrams movies, and yet there's people who really, really love them. And so we're going to try to find a point of connection between the two camps. And my lineup to this point has been, I don't like them. I don't feel like they have the spirit of, the original Trek in mind, whatever that means. Right. But now that we have a new universe going forward of Discovery and Picard and all these other shows on CBS All Access, I feel more accepting of the idea of them being a fun sort of side thing now that they don't have to represent and hold the banner of Trek going forward.
So it was always a bucket list thing for me to write for Star Trek. Ever since I was wanted to be a professional writer, and my very first podcast with you when we talked about Darmok, I talked about how one of my first things I ever submitted to try and get a professional publishing credit was a Star Trek novel to Pocket Books, and so when the opportunity came along to finally get my chance to write, and it turned out to be the Kelvin Universe, I was like, oh. Well, how important is that bucket? But I still jumped at the chance, and I am a fan of the 2009 Star Trek. I really do like it. I'm not a fan at all of its follow-up, Into Darkness. I think it's a pretty terrible movie, and there were things I liked about the third film, but I really didn't. It's not one I own or have really. I'm not even sure I've watched it more than once or twice. I really enjoyed in the third film how it felt like we were kind of trying to get back to the idea of them going on missions and that sort of thing. And I think we've spoken on the podcast before about, unfortunately, that they just talk about it. It's like, oh, we've been doing these missions for a long time, and I'm like, well, we haven't seen you do the missions for a long time. That would have been really cool to watch. So I really like the characters. I like the way that the actors took those characters and made them their own. I really felt like it breathed a fresh life into those TOS characters. But I totally understand the criticisms of the Kelvin Universe. It's a new kind of storytelling that we've seen, not just with Trek, but with television and movies, where like, oh, we can have red matter, and it doesn't really matter what that is. It's just the MacGuffin that blows up this planet. Yeah. And I think that there's a sort of fast and loose quality of story writing that a lot of people have used, where this was one of my criticisms of the first season of Discovery, that often surprise was favored over deeper plot exploration. And so I feel like the Kelvin Universe is kind of a product of that, and maybe also, unfortunately, sort of set the tone for some future Trek, including Discovery, and we'll have to see what happens with other Trek incarnations. But I don't know. I love that first movie. I remember being in the theater and just enjoying it. But for the other two, I felt like it just really, I don't know.
I've seen the first one a couple times now, just in preparation for this, and I'm starting to come around on the charm of it. But in addition to what you pointed out about surprise, and twists and that sort of being the kind of flavor of the film, I also feel like maybe this is possibly just a metatextual thing, but they were both wise. Well, they were wise to do this, which is they were wise to set up their characters as being sort of behind in terms of competency. Like you think about the Star Trek show, you've got the best of the best on the flagship.
Right.
They're always going to get it right. They're going to face things that are unknowable, but they're going to figure it out. Whereas like 2009, it's like, whoop, 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 Kirk and company are just, they're all beginners. They all got their jobs because the person in front of them died. And that makes them scrappy and it makes them attractive to an audience. But I think it's also the writers saying, well, how do we introduce reintroduce old characters or introduce new characters who have the same competency. Let's try this instead. And when I look at it like that, then I don't get depressed that Kirk is running around, with giant hands and he's tripping all over himself and stuff. You see, it was
definitely silly stuff like that. And there are things that are done in a lot of modern stories and especially in reboots that are like head scratching kind of things where it's like, why are we being silly here? Or why, why is this goofball? Why are our characters not as smart or as capable as we thought they were, in previous incarnations? And I think a lot of it gets down to trying to just entertain. I read an interesting criticism of some later of recent Marvel comics saying that they're very cartoony. And they don't mean the illustrations; they mean, the cartoon physics of of like Wile E. Coyote running in midair, or just silly stuff. And I like that in its place. When I'm reading an Avengers comic, I don't really want to see the silly stuff, but I definitely want it out of my unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And so, I don't know, but then when it finds its way into the major franchise, when it finds its way on, there are a lot of people who hated Thor Ragnarok. And I love Thor Ragnarok. I think it's one of the best Marvel movies. And I've read some people who are just like we need to strike it from the record. And
interesting.
Yeah, but
he's the perfect character for that because
I thought so.
He is the most ostentatious.
Absolutely.
He's just ripe for parody. Yeah. And that's kind of like what I think maybe their approach was with the Star Trek thing, because Pine is almost like a Kirk Jr. I can almost see this being the regular universe, and he's like Kirk's, son, and he has to sort of live up to Kirk's legacy. That's kind of what those movies are doing.
Interesting. Yeah. So I hope that when you guys do your review of the 2009 Star Trek, that you don't crush it. I still think it's a lot of fun. I wish that the later two movies had been better, a lot better. I think that those kind of put a nail in the coffin of the film franchise. And now Trek has been traditionally that its real home is television. So perhaps we can just get back to the TV shows and like you said earlier, maybe with the Starfleet Academy cartoon, isn't that the one that's going to be the cartoon? I think.
Yes.
Maybe that one will be silly because it's from a writer who worked on Rick and Morty, and we'll have a silly one. We'll have the nostalgic, introspective House of Picards. We'll have the new flashy, surprise-ridden Discovery. There'll be something for everybody, perhaps. So we'll see.
Yeah, I can't imagine them trying to nerf Picard into some kind of wacky characters, trying to keep up with everybody else.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope not. Yeah, and from everything that Stewart has said about the show and that's come out about it that I've read, they keep warning this is an introspective show, I don't know what that means. Is that code for there's not going to be a plot? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, or just less explosions, perhaps.
Maybe.
Well, why did you choose this two-parter to discuss today?
Okay, yeah. So I love Garak, and you've had a couple of guests on the show who've waxed poetic about Garak and how fabulous he is, and I have to concur with that. So when I thought about what I would pitch to you to talk about, I was like, well, I love Garak. Let me find a great Garak episode. Also, I have been heard to say, even here on this quality podcast, that Deep Space Nine is my favorite of the television shows. And this is my fourth time on the show. And I have yet to talk about Deep Space Nine. I had yet to. And so I was like, well, I better put my mouth where my mouth is and pick a Deep Space Nine episode. So it was both of those. I wanted to do a Deep Space Nine and talk about that show and a particular episode, or in this case two, but also, man, I love Garak. There's so many great characters on Deep Space Nine, but definitely he's one I wanted to talk about. I also I loved Garak enough that I read A Stitch in Time, the book that Andrew Robinson wrote about his own character, and from everything I've read, he actually wrote the book. This was not there was no ghostwriter, there was no co-writer. and this is something we can talk about in our discussion of the episode, because he basically, from what I understand, he was writing a diary while he was playing the character on the show, exploring Garrick's background, and then eventually pitched that as a book to Pocket Books, and it was turned into a novel. So his is one of the characters. I haven't read all the Deep Space Nine novels. I've read a few. That's one I did because I love this character so much.
Yeah. Not to mention that the last thing that we talked about was Threshold, so it's nice to be doing a good one.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I wanted to. I was like, man, well, I could pick another bad one, but no, I just we need a unicorn chaser for that one.
Make a thing out of it. Yeah. I was thinking about the tradition of two-parters, like how TNG really kicked it off at the end of their third season with Best of Both Worlds, and thereafter ended all of their seasons, on the first part of a two-parter. But DS9 never really does that. Instead of ending with a cliffhanger, a to be continued, at the end of their seasons, they're ending with an emotional cliffhanger of sorts. Something significant or dire happens, but we're not going to pick right up where it left off when the show comes back. We're usually, when we come back, immersed in the consequences of the previous episode. I think TNG is trying to keep you watching and to keep resetting the status quo, but DS9 is really building on these game-changing developments in that serial storytelling way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We see their two-parters falling in the middles of seasons. Not particularly the smack dab in the middle, but somewhere in the run where they felt like they had a story that warranted more than one episode. And in fact, this one, from what I've read, started as a single episode, and the writers did not like the way it just quickly wrapped up. And I guess it was Michael Piller in his very last action as executive producer on the show who said, make it two. We're going to break it. We're going to make it, let's play two. We're going to make this a two-parter. They quickly rewrote the end of it. They flipped the filming schedule. I think they were filming the Mirror Universe episode. I think so. I think they played the Mirror Universe episode earlier, like 1 week earlier than they were going to give them time to film the second episode for this, which is I think one of the reasons this is one of the only episodes in all of Star Trek that's one of the only two-parters where the first episode and the second episode do not share the same title. Right. So, unlike, Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and Part 2, and now we have Improbable Cause and The Die is Cast. But I've got some other thoughts on how I think how wonderfully the two writers who handled each of the episodes how Ron Moore referred to the first episode that Echevarria wrote really masterfully for not knowing, except like the week he was sitting down to write it, that this was part two of something and that had to get done pretty fast.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one reason that, just other than being really great and being one of the major writers, you give something like that to Ron Moore. So we got to build this out real fast. So I used to have a joke about writing that cheap, fast, or good, pick two.
Okay, sure. Right. You can't have all three. But Ron Moore, it appears, is capable of doing all three at once.
I think he can. Yeah. Well, we are talking the DS9 episodes Improbable Cause and The Die is Cast. Cause first aired on April 24th of 1995, and Cast aired the next week on May 1st, 1995. The story for Improbable Cause was by Robert Lederman and David R. Long. Lederman was a writer, director, and editor for all of Roddenberry/Berman Trek. In addition to this episode, he also provided the story for the fifth season DS9 episode, The Assignment, with his writing partner David Long. And the pair also wrote the seventh season Voyager episode, Nightingale. Lederman also directed 2 episodes of TNG, and he was an editor on over 100 episodes of the combined series. The teleplay for the episode was by Renee Echevarria, of course a writer and producer on TNG and DS9, no introduction needed. And as we mentioned, the script for The Die is Cast is by Ronald D. Moore, also no intro required. Cause was directed by series star Avery Brooks, and we'll take a moment to talk about him in a minute or two. Yeah. And Cast was directed by David Livingston, another person who needs no introduction. Yeah. But suffice it to say, the most prolific director of Berman Trek, and the man who really cemented, I think, the visual style for the franchise post-TNG.
Yeah.
The stardate for the episode is never given on screen, although the action takes place in the year 2371 by Earth Reckoning. And chronologically, it must take place sometime after 48543.2, which is the date given in the episode Destiny. But that was 5 episodes earlier. And the next date that we get is 48764, which is the date in which the episode Shakar takes place. And that's 3 episodes after this two-parter. It's kind of a lack of star dates near the end of the 3rd season, as many of these stories are non-Starfleet tales.
Yeah, like the very next episode after these two is, if I'm not mistaken, the one where Jake and Sisko they build the light sail ship,
right,
which is a fantastic episode, I think, and but totally non-continuity. Like it just like we have
anywhere.
This huge momentous stuff that happens in these 2 episodes, and then we take an episode to build a light ship.
Yeah, it's also the first episode that we see the goatee and Sisko's transformation into the man called Hawk. So I guess from a continuity perspective, they did kind of have to put it in a certain place.
They did, and so look, many people love to sort of tongue-in-cheek date the good TNG episodes from when Riker gets a beard, and the good ones in Deep Space Nine from when, or the great ones from when Sisko gets his beard and shaves his head. Yeah. So I'm down with that. I think there's plenty of examples of good episodes before both of those beard episodes, beard accomplishments, achievements. I don't know what you want to call it.
Sure.
But if we're to mark the really, really good Deep Space Nine from the time when Sisko becomes Hawk, I think we have to start with these 2 episodes, particularly the second one, and say like in the intervening time, because everything has hit the fan, he grows the beard and shaves the head, and we're off.
Right.
Like this is what caused the beard, and we have to give time for the beard to come out. So it's a great turning point for the series, and we'll talk more about that too.
Yeah, Hawk is the type of man who would say, you can't hear that transmission, it's too garbled, we're doing this anyway. But Hawk is also the kind of man that would have tossed Eddington out an airlock, but we'll talk about that a little later too. Your assignment, if you can, is to give us we'll give you a 50-word synopsis of these 2 episodes.
I did both in 25. I was prepared.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
All right, here we go. It's pretty short as a consequence, but Garrick and Odo discover the Romulan and Cardassian intelligence agencies have joined forces to launch a sneak attack against the Founders' homeworld. It goes poorly. That's my exactly 25 word double summary for both episodes.
Well, that'll do. That's perfect. We mentioned Avery Brooks before. He's, of course, an actor and a director as well. He directed 9 episodes of DS9 in total. And that's something that's discussed in the recent DS9 documentary, What We Left Behind, which I think you've seen.
I have.
When it was first announced, I think that there was some sorrow amongst fans that apparently they were not able to secure Avery Brooks because I guess he considers to be this part of his life behind him, which I can understand, I guess, as a performer. But they did manage to get him in some capacity because he, of course, appears in a few interviews and he is discussed for much of the documentary.
Sure, you can't talk about Deep Space Nine without talking about Avery Brooks. Besides being the commander/captain of the show, he was so much a defining part of what it was, and did direct episodes, including, I think he directed Far Beyond the Stars, which he was amazing in.
Yes.
I think he directed that as well. I was disappointed. It's noticeable when you watch the documentary that Avery Brooks. Obviously, they invited him. Obviously, they would want him to be a part of it. But it was clear that he had said that he wasn't interested. I think that, yes, we as fans, we can say, oh, but don't you love it? Don't you want to come back? But let's be fair. This is a man who probably at every Star Trek convention he ever went to, at every Dragon Con, at every Comic Con, sat up on that stage and somebody said, what was it like to be the first black captain in Star Trek? And how many times can there were, as I've read, he began to be frustrated that people were asking him basically like, what's it feel like to be black, rather than asking him actual questions about his acting and the character on the show. And when Avery Brooks says, I've kind of said all I can say about Deep Space Nine, I think maybe that's because he gets asked pretty much the same question over and over again. Obviously, people have asked him other stuff, but how many times can you sit up there on stage and you're just waiting for it and you're waiting for it? I work in the kids book field, and there's been a lot of call for diversity in children's books. For centuries, we had predominantly white characters in children's books, and that has been changing. But there are studies that show that there are still like 10% of the books last year had an African American main character. And that's the most represented of people of color. You start getting into, like Chinese characters or Korean characters, and it goes down beneath 1%. I mean, Native American characters beneath 1%. So, like, this is something that the kids book world is talking about nonstop. Yeah. But there's been a call among my friends who are people of color who write books for kids. They're like, please stop putting me on diversity panels. I don't want to talk about diversity. I want to talk about the characters that I'm writing and the books that I've written. And I gotta say, if that's his reason for not wanting to do it, because he feels like that he's been there and done that a million times, I totally get it. It's not his job to tell us why we need diversity. He was there to be this amazing character and do this amazing work, and he did it. Yeah. And it's a shame, though, because obviously the documentary would have asked him about the other stuff too. But I get it. I get why he might choose to not be a part of that anymore.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think the one thing that you kind of miss is that, part of the documentary just focuses on the group being back together again and enjoying each other's company. But even that sort of fits because the way that the show ends with him sort of removed and off somewhere else and this sort of elevated figure, like he still maintains that position like in the context of the documentary.
Yeah, it does fit for the character in a way that you can see. I never read any of the expanded universe novels that were supposed to take place after Deep Space Nine, the last episode of Deep Space Nine. So I'm not sure in what way they would have even used his character. Because if I'm not mistaken, in the last one, it's been a while since I watched the last ones, but he sort of disappears and says, "I'll be back sometime," and we don't know when or if he's going to come back.
Right.
So. I don't know what they did with him, but it felt very Avery Brooks, like I'm out.
Yeah. And of course, in the documentary, you get to see a proposed 8th season in which, we see the return, at least in some way, of Sisko. And I got to say, those guys are all still working today, but they still got the magic. It's like they fell right back into it. Those are some of my favorite scenes from the documentary. Yeah,
I love that too. I always love to see writers at work and writers' rooms, that kind of thing. I'm a craft junkie when it comes to writing, and so I loved seeing that inside look at what it might have been like for them to just sit around and spitball ideas for a full season arc, and for an individual episode. One of my favorite things, and of course I was watching it in the theater, so I don't have the DVD to pause it. But there were a number of shots of the big whiteboard, and there was a lot more stuff on that whiteboard than we heard in the documentary because they just didn't have time for that. Yeah. So it'd be really fun. I don't know if the extras are going to have the entire filmed thing. That would probably be incredibly tedious, but at least some chance to see what else they put up on that whiteboard would be fascinating.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, here's some interesting facts about this episode, or these episodes from our memory banks. Yeah. As you had mentioned before, the original concept of the episode was as a single episode. And I think the way they had it set up was it'd be essentially the same story, but at the end of it, Tane would, have Odo and Garrick imprisoned, and Garrick would threaten him with the contents of this isolinear rod that he mentions to Bashir, which becomes a joke in this first
joke,
part of a two-parter.
Recycle that,
yeah. But in that episode, there would be something on there that we'd never really find out what it is. Also, the sort of direction or focus of the episode changed a little bit. Originally, the Order would be looking to assassinate Garrick for his part in the episode Second Skin, when he kills Obsidian Order officer Entek. But as they began to develop it more, they thought it would be better to have this be something of a continuation or a sequel episode to the episode Defiant, where Thomas Riker steals the titular ship to investigate the claims that the Cardassians are amassing ships in the Aureus system. And that turns out to be true because they are amassing a fleet.
Yeah, it's a great callback. And this is, I think, one of the real strengths of Deep Space Nine is that that when they were they weren't thinking, how do we make a standalone episode where Garak blows up his own shop? That was, I think, one of the original sort of key pitches to them. Garak blows up his own shop to bring Odo into an investigation, which is a fantastic plot point. But then they're like, okay, great. How can we tie this in to things that we have already established? And that's something that I don't think that TNG ever really stopped to do. They were so focused on the episodic thing that they rarely made references to previous things that had happened, let alone say, let's tie it to that. Let's make this a continuation of that story. Yeah. I think that's one of the real strengths of Deep Space Nine. And I guess around this time, Voyager was on the table. Had TNG ended by this time? I can't remember. I think
93. It should have been. Well, wait, what was it? 1995. So yeah, it had ended.
It had ended. So, but at some point though, they basically, like, Deep Space Nine was like, you guys just go do your thing, and we're going to focus on Voyager because it's our new flagship for this new channel and everything. And they were like, okay, great, we can be as self-referential as we want to here, and that, of course, we see that evolve until, like, there's a 9-part finale to this show in its last season. So they just let them play to a great extent, and I think this is one of those early examples of that. I think it's great that they were able to say, let's see where we can connect this. I got to say though, I think it's funny that they took, that the writers said, this thing that we're doing to get out of this episode is so cliche. Like, if you don't let me go, I've got this isolinear rod with a bunch of dirt on it that's going to get you in trouble, right? I mean, at this point, Enabran Tain is like, he and the Romulans are plotting this massive attack on the Founder homeworld. I don't know what could possibly be on an isolinear rod that he would care enough at this point, but it is such a cliche, and Ron Moore said everything they came up with in the writer's room just felt like a cliche to get him out of it. And that's why Piller said, so take more time and do something different. How was it supposed to end though? Do you know what we know in Dia's cast, they attack the homeworld, it fails. Yeah. Was that going to happen in this episode?
As far as I could see, yes. It would be everything that happens story-wise in the episodes. It's just condensed into one episode.
And so Garrick and Odo would have gotten away before the failure?
Yeah, I assume, yeah.
Yeah. So it's so much more interesting, of course, to have them there. And we're jumping ahead to the second episode, I am at least. But to have, that moment where the Akbar line, it's a trap, to realize in the moment that they've been tricked, and that almost that combination of delight and fear, absolute fear on Garrick's face, like the respect, like, oh my gosh, what a great trick.
Yeah, right.
And now I'm going to die for it.
And also just the action of trying to fill out now 2 hours of TV where it was one before. You give it to Ron Moore and say, hey, Ron, kill time. And he writes a scene where Garrick tortures Odo, and it's like the best scene.
It becomes one of the iconic scenes. And David, I guess it was David Livingston that directed that one, said that he kept that on his director's reel for the rest of his career.
Wow.
That he felt like that was some of his best work, some of the actors' best work, some of the writers' best work. We do, unfortunately, in that episode also get the Eddington business on the Defiant, which does feel like killing time a little bit, like on purpose delaying the Defiant. But what we get in return is that scene with Odo and Garak.
That's true.
Yeah.
Before we
Yes.
get to Die is Cast, we'll wrap up Improbable Cause.
Yep.
The Tal Shiar get their new uniforms in this episode.
Yeah.
Which were apparently the brainchild of Ron Moore and costume designer Robert Blackman, because Moore hated the big shoulder pad quilted look of the old uniforms, which I love, but I guess I can see why you'd want to change it, though. Yeah.
Yeah. These are certainly more understated, and Moore said at least let the Tal Shiar have something different.
Let them be the cool guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? I like the big quilted things. I thought they were pretty great. Maybe they got them at like the Romulan eagle or something like that.
Right.
We also get the debut of my favorite fashion piece in this, and that is the Cardassian cardigan.
Yes.
And Auburn Tain is wearing a cardi, as I might call it.
Sure.
I thought, wow. So Garrick is always wearing these amazing outfits, but then, like, what are they going to put Tain in? And he's basically like George Smiley walking in the door, from Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. I mean, he's like an old spy guy, but out of retirement. He's like, chilling in my cardigan, So there was some new fashion for the Romulans and the Cardassians in this one.
Yeah, Garrick himself gets a real sort of stylish, distinctive look too when he goes evil. It reminds me of like a Jack Kirby superhero costume, something like an Eternal would wear or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like in that X-Men movie when Apocalypse, whenever he'd take over a new bad guy, would give him a makeover.
Yeah, he gives him a makeover. Just a little glow up.
Yeah. We'll do something with your hair. I got you a new uniform. You're gonna love it.
Well, this episode was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Hairstyling for a series. And it must have been the catfish guy with the friendly plastic balls in his hair that put it over the top.
Yeah, this is the perfume salesman. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That was a super strange look. This is the point where they're just like, how many different ways can we mess up a person's face?
Yeah.
That was a weird, but I guess, that is some hairstyling. I love that scene though, to pull that
that's
scene
a great
out.
scene.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I mentioned Garrick, and I should also have said at the top, it's not only, of course, a great Garrick episode, it's a fantastic two-parter for Odo. And we get to see Odo doing his thing on the station. We get to plumb the depths of his connection to the founders and the home world. It's a fantastic episode for him, and that scene with the perfume salesman / assassin, they're both playing a game and they know it and they're both enjoying it. And but what happens if we mix this with this? And that might be a little too spicy. The writing of it's fantastic. It's given some time for the actors to really play with it, and it's a really good red herring for what's really going on in the episode. I mean, when you're writing spy stuff, you can't ever what you see on the surface is never really what's going on. And yes, in Auburn Tain or through the Romulans, they hired him to go and kill Garrick, but there's way more going on here than meets the eye.
And I love that Odo figures it out, but instead of setting up the sort of drawing room Poirot situation where he reveals all the things, they don't have time for that. He's just like, why are you doing this? I know you blew up your shop. Like, what's the point of this?
Right.
Like, what's behind this?
That moment where he turns on Garrick and he's like, I know you blew up your own shop. And Garrick is speechless. He's like, wait, what's this? I don't think I've ever seen that look of surprise on your face before. And, and Garrick turns around and is like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's a great moment. And it's a fantastic surprise that is earned. Odo has done his homework. When Garrick walks in, he's like, I'm sorry to tell you that Major Kira has an alibi. like we all know she didn't do this, but I did the legwork. I know that you did this yourself because nobody else would do this. Right. It's a great detective moment for Odo, and a great reveal for Garak. Of course, he blew up his own shop.
As for the Die is Cast, it was the first episode, of course, where Ira Stephen Bear took over from Michael Piller as executive producer because he was going off to run Voyager. And Bear was really committed to using the series' expanded budgets now to depict more space battles on screen. And the confrontation we get in this episode between the Dominion, the Tal Shiar, and the Obsidian Order is the first of many large-scale battles that we'll see as the series progresses and the war escalates. And even though there was more money, there wasn't an unlimited amount of money. And so VFX supervisor Gary Hutzel managed to save money in this episode by using transparencies of background Romulan and Cardassian ships instead of requiring full models to be used in some of the battle scenes.
Yeah, you can't tell. I mean, I'd have to stop it and freeze it to really notice. I think it's a really clever bit of trickery to not have full-scale models in the background. And but I love that Bear said, we know people love this, and we love it, and we want to see more of it.
Sure.
There are so many times in TNG and in the past of Deep Space Nine where we talk about things that happened, but we don't see them because we know they didn't have the budget for them. But to really do that and to say, hey, we're going to get into, you want to see a big fight? Here's a big fight, and
right.
He just throws it down in that Die is Cast episode, and it's fabulous.
It's very I'm just about to talk about Shakespeare. It's very Shakespearean to say that there's going to be a big battle. Cut to the next scene, somebody runs in. We're totally losing the battle, and we never see the battle. But they wanted to put that on the screen.
Yeah, Julius died off stage.
Right. Yeah. Julius Caesar is referenced several times in the episode. Bashir and Garrick, of course, are discussing the play by Shakespeare in the prologue of Improbable Cause. And he paraphrases Cassius's line to Brutus, Garrick does, when he tells Tane that the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves at the end of Die is Cast. Yeah. And the phrase the Die is Cast, or alea iacta est, itself comes from the phrase reportedly used by Julius Caesar before crossing the Rubicon with his legions in 49 BC. Both Plutarch and Suetonius attribute a form of the quote to him. And it's interesting, the shuttle that is commissioned to replace the Mekong, the shuttle that Garrick and Odo lose in this episode, is dubbed later the Rubicon by Cisco.
I think it's fabulous. I read that and researching this episode too as well. And I thought, 2 weeks later, the new shuttlecraft shows up and it's called the Rubicon. And I was like, what a great, they were sitting around and they were like, we name them after rivers. So what river are we going to name this one after? And they were like, wait, that episode where it got destroyed, we had all these Caesar references. It's got to be the Rubicon. It's genius.
This is pre-internet. Who's going to catch this?
I didn't the first time around. When I saw it, I didn't make that connection. But watching them, when you can binge watch it and then you can look up things. I knew the story of the Die is Cast and crossing the Rubicon. I took Latin in high school and remembered my Roman history all too well, unfortunately. And but I just thought that that's the kind of continuity that Deep Space Nine was weaving in, and they didn't make a big deal of it. They were just like, sometimes a whole episode would be about something in the past, but sometimes it's just a reference to something in the past. In this one, somebody, the Deep Throat Romulan, the Deep Throat Cardassian, asks Odo if he still does the Cardassian neck trick.
Yeah, right.
Which is a reference to something that was brought up like a season ago.
Yeah.
And it's just, this is a group of people who are all in the writer's room and all saying, wait, we can reference that, we can connect it to this, we can do that. Deep Space Nine was really ahead of its time in that regard, I think, and in terms of the way we see that storytelling in TV today. And
the neck trick always reminds me of Goodfellas. It's like, go get your shine box, and tell him to go get his shine box.
Do that thing. Yeah. Hopefully it ends up differently. I love that. Calling the next one the Rubicon, the Die is Cast, all that stuff was really fabulous. And again, I'll bring this back to Ron Moore. So Echevarria has written a first episode. They changed the end of it to break it into two parts. But he's already written in the Caesar's conversation over breakfast, probably putting on my writer's hat here. That scene is all of that play is all about betrayal. Yeah. And he's going to start talking about Garak and his betrayal of Tane, and so he's pulling in some element to talk about betrayal. So then Ron Moore gets the assignment for the second episode, and he says, well, we've got the betrayal and we've got Caesar. how can I work more Caesar into this? And we've got the Cassius line, we've got, and then later on the Rubicon. But this is, and he calls the episode "The Die is Cast," and this is that moment where Caesar crosses the Rubicon. It's become our Darmok metaphor for a point of no return, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's we're going all in, and that's what the Romulans and Cardassians do in the second episode, and it changes this show for the next 3.5 seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. The Cardassian informant that you mentioned previously, as we start talking about some of the guest stars in this episode, he was played by Joseph Ruskin, and Ruskin has a storied career in film and television, appearing first on TV in a 1955 episode of The Honeymooners, and he went on to roles in The Outer Limits, Time Tunnel, The Twilight Zone, and more. Ruskin has the distinction of being in all the pre-Discovery Trek series, with the exception of TNG. He appeared initially as Galt in the original series episode The Gamesters of Triskelion.
Oh, sure, okay.
He would appear twice in DS9 as Tumek the Klingon, as well as the Cardassian informant. He appeared as the Vulcan Master in the Voyager episode Gravity, and he played a Suliban doctor in the Enterprise pilot Broken Bow. Oh, wow. And technically, he did work for TNG, as he played a Sona officer in Star Trek Insurrection.
Okay.
And he died in 2013. His last role was mob boss Primo Sparazza in the 2006 film Smoking Aces.
Very cool. He's great in this as a... all we see are his eyes. Yeah. It's such a great deep throat moment. Of course, Odo still has connections.
Yeah. Follow the Latinum. Right.
Yeah. Right. And I love when he says, like, I don't want you to see my face. I've changed it since the last time we saw each other. That's great stuff. I mean, Echevarria is really playing with the spy stuff in this one, I think, and what spies would be like in the future. And I'm now out of your debt, but if you learn anything, I could be in your debt again. This tit for tat kind of trading thing that they do is really fantastic.
Yeah. Juliana McCarthy appears as Mila, Tane's housekeeper, and she'll, of course, appear again in the season 7 episodes, The Dogs of War, more Shakespeare there, right. And, of course, What You Leave Behind. McCarthy has made frequent film and TV appearances since the late 1970s, and I'm hoping that we can put to bed a question that I've had for a long time, as it relates to female Cardassians. Female Cardassians, they have the spoon, just like male Cardassians do. But the inside of the spoon, the depression is blue. And then the fourth neck bone down on the side of their necks is blue as well. And I've always wondered, is that a genetic trait or is that cosmetic? Is that something that they put on?
My vote is makeup. And I've noticed that in the past. And my feeling was that the Cardassian women were wearing makeup. Okay. And I'd have to look at all the Cardassian women to see if they uniformly do it. Like, I can't remember, what is Ducat's daughter's name?
Zial.
Zial, thank you.
Like, she does not have it.
Okay, so perhaps she's just doesn't wear makeup.
Sure.
I can see that it could also be something you could totally argue, and this is all headcanon for us, but you could totally argue that it's something that appears on some women and some that doesn't. But I like the idea that, look, many of the other female members of other species in this show wear makeup. So why not them?
Complicating it somewhat, when we see Seska in her sort of halfway transition back to Cardassian form, it is her spoon, if you will, is somewhat discolored. So again, I don't know if she's just dipping her pinky in something and then freshening up or what, but it drives me crazy.
I like the idea. I like the idea of it being makeup. I like the idea that that not everybody in a race wears the same clothes and wears the same kind of makeup. We do that for our human characters and maybe for like the Bajorans or somebody who looks more human. But I always appreciate those small details in alien races because, of course, they would be as different as we are.
Yeah. No more monocultures.
Right, exactly.
Leland Orser appears in the episode as Lovok, or should I say the Changeling.
Right.
And he is an extremely prolific actor, probably a top 10, hey, it's that guy of the modern Hollywood era. He's got many TV credits, including LA Law, The X-Files, NYPD Blue, CSI, and more. Some of his film credits include The Bone Collector, Pearl Harbor, Daredevil, Seven, and Saving Private Ryan. Those last two, he was the go-to guy in the late 90s for shaky, sweaty guy freaking out out about something. He's got that scene in 7 where he's, the sort of ancillary victim of the killer.
Right.
And he's like, he made me do it. He's that guy that we need some guy to just freak out here.
And it's funny because in those roles, he's playing the freak out, the person who's freaking out. In this one, he's playing a fabulously cool-headed Romulan.
Yes.
/ changeling.
Right.
And I just think he has some fantastic lines, like that, the moment in the second episode where Garak pretty obviously is like, I don't think we should kill Odo. He
Yes.
could be useful. And
I say we let him go.
yeah, and Tane's like not going to believe this. Tane's he's like, we're going to kill the guy. And Lovok speaks up, no, we can learn stuff from torturing him. And but they're leaving, and Lovok stops him, and he's like, why did you try to protect the changeling? He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, I'm a practiced observer, Mr. Garrick, and I promise you that I will be observing you very closely. I mean,
right.
He has this real sinister presence without being a mustache twirler. He's like what a Vulcan would be if you're scared of him. You know what I mean? Scary Vulcan.
Yeah. Orser's also played several other characters in the Trek universe. He played the role of Guy in the second season DS9 episode Sanctuary, the role of Djarin in the fourth season Voyager episode Revulsion, and he played Loomis in the third season Enterprise episode Carpenter Street.
Yeah, a guy with a lot of Star Trek credits, yeah.
Yeah, he's brought his talents to Star Trek more than once. Kenneth Marshall appears as Michael Eddington, and I can barely bring myself to talk about him. I hate him so much. Yeah. Probably best known for playing the hero Colwyn in the 1983 movie Krull. He's also made a number of TV appearances.
Yeah, he's really Krull?
That's the guy from Krull.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
He's it blew my mind too.
Yeah.
He's made a number of TV appearances in the 80s and 90s, including the title role in the 1982 miniseries Marco Polo. And his inclusion, I guess, from a story perspective, in the third and fourth season and then fifth season are good. But I think, as you brought up before, what you were sort of getting at before is his action in this episode is merely a stalling sort of tactic.
Him. Yes,
well, and that too. Maybe they didn't know this at the time, but there's a huge betrayal coming in his future that will be part of his storyline, and also he'll be the sort of representative of the Maquis. But having him betray the crew at the behest of Starfleet intelligence makes him totally untrustable, so that Sisko should have never fallen for his betrayal later.
He's done it once. And Sisko has that line. I take it, it's something like, I've learned never to always take the word of a person wearing that uniform. And my favorite part of that is that Kira Nerys is standing right behind him. And the look on her face of like, you have got to be crapping me. Like, you're serious on this? Like her face is like, no, you kill this guy right now.
Yeah, right. We don't need this guy.
And seriously, I hadn't. So I've watched the run of Deep Space Nine a few times, and I have a really particular dislike of the Eddington character, not just because of what he does, but I really dislike the whole Les Mis.
He's so sanctimonious. Yeah.
I just can't stand it. And so I'm rewatching these to talk about it with you. And I'm like, oh crap, Eddington's in this one. Crap. And then of course I remembered as he's doing it that they use him as a plot point in the second episode to delay the Defiant. And seriously, that's it. I understand he's taking orders from a higher power, but that means sayonara. You're out.
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't give this guy any response. I would assign him to cleaning the promenade, with the waxing machine from now on.
Yeah.
I don't trust this guy with anything. If he's taking orders from a higher power, then no, Sisko's the boss. You gotta get rid of him. And
thank God we get Worf next season, so somebody can sit at tactical. We don't need this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course he was brought. So as I read, because I was like, oh, Eddington, but I read that he was initially brought on with the idea that he would be a changeling infiltrator,
okay,
and that at the end of the season, after they didn't want to just have him brought on and then exposed right away in one episode.
Right.
So they were going to have him be around for a while and then get exposed. But then I guess they liked him and they decided not to go that direction. I don't know. Okay. But they still make him a villain, but in a different way. But Eddington's the character that I dislike. We already have a station security in Odo. And then when they bring on Worf, now we've got 3 of them. So he felt really, really redundant, except for what he's doing to mess everybody up. And at that point, I think you just don't invite him to your party anymore.
Yeah, and maybe it was too early because we know that war is brewing and we're going to need an intelligence side of it. But by the time he goes, we get Admiral Ross, and then also we have Section 31 encroaching. So that gets fulfilled in later seasons. We don't really need him at that point. But in the episode, of course, Eddington is taking orders from Admiral Todman, played by Leon Russum. And I should note that Todman is the first operations admiral we see in Star Trek, the first guy in yellow.
Yeah, he's wearing yellow, yeah.
He just teched the tech so good, they had to just send him all the way up to admiral. Russum has an impressive career in TV, film, and on the stage. He's still acting today. His most recent role was old guy that gets eaten in the woods in A Quiet Place.
Oh, very nice.
He has the rare distinction of playing an admiral in 2 eras of Trek, having played the Starfleet Commander-in-Chief in Star Trek VI. His character is only known as Bill in that movie, but some fans have headcanoned his last name as Todman, suggesting there is a connection. Perhaps he's an ancestor of the Todman of the 24th century.
Nice. I like very much the way that Starfleet Command handles this when they learn about the plot. They're like, you know what? We're just going to let them do it.
Yeah, right.
And everybody in the room's like, wait, what? This is going to cause a war with the Dominion. And he's like, well, not if they do it.
Right.
Not if they're successful. It's like, it's really fascinating. It's Starfleet looking at this crazy plot and saying, sure, go for it.
And it's kind of dark because we've seen situations like this before on Trek where, say, Picard's response is, well, we got to call the Dominion. We got to let them know they're coming. Like that. That's the polite thing to do.
Or stop them. Yes, stop them.
Or just stop them, yeah.
Yeah, stop them or let them know it's happening. And Command is like, let's just see what happens.
Let's watch.
And it makes sense. I mean, Starfleet has identified the Dominion as a huge threat.
Yeah.
And the Romulans and Cardassian intelligence agencies want to go and do a sneak attack. Starfleet doesn't get its hands dirty.
Sure.
And they can still say, we had no idea.
Yeah, it's the 2 secretive intelligence agencies, so there's a lot of deniability on your side as well. You can go, well, we didn't know.
Yeah, right. I mean, that whole they're sitting around watching a video from Enobrentane saying, nobody else knows we're doing this, but we're doing it. And it's too late to stop us. And he's kind of right. And so Starfleet's like, well, let's just cross our fingers and hope for the best.
Yeah. And speaking of Enobrentane, we've got one more VIP for this episode, played, of course, by Paul Dooley, a role that he reprises from his appearance in the second season episode, The Wire. And Dooley, I mean, if you don't know this guy, he's definitely a top 5, that guy.
Yeah.
He discovered acting in college after serving in the Navy. He got to start in stand-up comedy in the 60s. He also worked as a magician and a clown. His first on-screen role was for the 1963 TV series East Side, West Side, and he's gone on to over 200 credits on IMDb, including playing the dad in Breaking Away, Wimpy in Altman's Popeye, the dad in 16 Candles.
Dad in 16 Candles, yeah.
Larry's father in Father-in-Law and Curb Your Enthusiasm, the voice of Sarge in Pixar's Cars, and many more. There's a great episode of the podcast, I Was There Too, where the host Matt Gorley talks to him about being America's dad in the 80s. It's
great. And his first Broadway credit was in The Odd Couple, the debut of The Odd Couple.
Okay.
And he was the understudy for Felix Unger.
Sure.
For Art Carney, and got that role when Art Carney left the show. I mean, that's like, this guy, he was born in 1928.
Yeah.
Right. He's like 91 years old now. He's still alive. Born in 1928. Can you imagine growing up in the 30s and not imagine 90s you telling your 12-year-old self, your 10-year-old self in the 30s about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I mean, the stuff that, I think sometimes we forget, and this is just me putting on my historical fiction writer hat, but we forget how connected we are. There are people alive today who were alive before World War II, who were alive for the Great Depression.
Right.
And it's just, I mean, we're getting to the tail end of that, but still, when you think about this guy and this enormous long career that he's had on stage and screen, it's pretty incredible. And was there ever a guy who was more a Paul Dooley than this guy? I mean, that name. I know that's not his birth name. Dooley isn't his. I think it's his stage name. But he's a Paul Dooley for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah,
My
he's a
favorite-
kid. He's a kid, like you said, this scenario where you're talking to him in the 30s, like he's a kid who's probably bemoaning the fact that he was born a little too late to really get into vaudeville. And it's like, what am I going to do? Now, fast forward, he's on this thing called cable television. He's on streaming shows. He's all over the place.
You're in every movie in the 90s as the dad.
Yeah.
He was also, and this is my favorite credit that he has, he created the Electric Company and was one of the head writers on the Electric Company.
Yeah.
That is nuts. Like, I loved that show when I was a kid, and to think about him as both this great actor, great character actor, but also a person who wrote for an educational kids program that basically did sketch comedy. I mean, what a career he's had, and what a great get he is for this part. He is I was talking about how Lovok has that subtle evil tinge to him. Tane is your dad until he's not. Until he's like the head of the Gestapo, and you're like, oh crap. I mean, he can be scary, really scary.
That's a real Smiley thing. You know, the guy in the cardigan is the most dangerous guy in the room. Yeah.
Right. There's just this wonderful flair to him. In the same way that you were talking about Saul Rubinek, playing that collector character. I mean, he brings a real flair to this character. Like, oh, Garrick, so good to see you. Now I don't have to send somebody to kill you again.
It's like delivery.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. And I'm so glad that they brought him back. So, of course, this is spoiling a later episode, but is it, I think, in Purgatory Shadow? Is that the title of the episode? Yes. Where we find out that the Dominion, we discover a number of people the Dominion has replaced with shapeshifters, and he's one of them. Or, well, no, I guess he's not one. He's in a jail cell with a few people who've been replaced by changelings. And Garrick gets to have his last moment with this guy, who is his dad.
Yes.
And this is something that the book A Stitch in Time explores a little bit. The idea is, so because I've read the book and because I've watched the show, I can't remember what shows up where. I think though that the book covers mostly stuff that's just happened in the show. I don't think Andrew Robinson wrote new family material and stuff. Like, for example, he puts in there a betrayal of Tane in The Stitch in Time, but I can't imagine it's the betrayal that they continually talk about in the show. In fact, most of the canon stuff that you read about these two characters, they refer to an unknown betrayal. Like, we still really don't know what he did to betray, what Garrick did to betray Tane.
And even in The Wire, when Garrick is talking about it, he gives like several different versions of it. We never find out what it is. Right.
And there's that great line, like right at the end, I think it's right at the end of the first of these two episodes of Improbable Cause. He's like, I never betrayed you. Not in my heart. It's like, nice qualification there. Huh?
Right.
Like,
well,
you really betrayed this guy.
Sure. It's just business. Yeah.
But not in your heart. I love that. And then when Tane says, come, join me and together we could rule a galaxy as father and son. And Odo's like, Garrick, this guy tried to kill you. Garrick, this guy is a mass murderer. He's like super evil. And he's like, I know, but I'm back, so, like, all is forgiven. I think they even say that at one point. But yeah, Dooley's fantastic, just fantastic. And he's ominous. And I think he also plays Tane's madness really well on the bridge in the very last act of The Die is Cast. That's got to be a hard role to play. You're told, okay, you are the last person standing on the bridge of a Romulan warbird as everything you've planned is crashing down around you. You've made a horrible tactical error, and you're going to die. And I think he plays that madness really well in that scene.
And it's the madness and danger of, just to bring back Julius Caesar again, of a Caesar, of somebody who is completely unquestioned. And you see in like a movie, about Rome or something where you bring somebody in front of the king, he better be happy, because if he's not, he's just going to flip his hand and then you're going to be gone.
You're gone, right.
You feel that when he comes in.
Yeah, and now Yeah, and now he's been betrayed. He's been betrayed by his own pride, his own.
Yes, yeah, which is very Shakespearean.
Yeah, pride comes before the fall.
In a way, I guess Andy Robinson is a guest actor on this show. He's only been in 37 out of the 176 episodes.
Yeah.
And Garrick he's just unquestionably one of the best characters on DS9, maybe in Trek and sci-fi as a whole. Something that we hear about sometimes on this show is that a certain character or a certain actor was brought on to play a character that was meant to be a one-off or a glorified extra, but the performance and the actor in the role struck such a chord that the writers, they couldn't help but keep bringing them back so they could write more for them and we could see more of them.
Yeah.
And that was really the case with Garrick. And Andy Robinson really embodies the role completely. And he had a lot of input, apparently, with the writers about the character. And as you mentioned, he kept these notes and journals kind of in character as Garrick, which later, went into A Stitch in Time.
And actually, in real life, became really good friends with Alexander Siddig. And was, I think, the godfather to his and Nana Visitor's child. I mean, like not only was he a really vital part of the cast, but really became part of the family that we often hear about on Deep Space Nine, literally in this case. And and that relationship that the two actors share really comes through in their scenes together between Bashir and Garak. And I'm glad that we got to start with that one. One of the notes I had to talk about was there are a number of small moments of grace in both of these episodes. Okay. And I think one of them is when Bashir returns to Garak to give him the chocolates for the journey. And yes, as a writer, it's a way to have, if you were going to have it end with the isolinear rod, it's an excuse for Bashir to talk to him.
Right.
But as it plays now, it's like, hey, I know you're going off on this really difficult journey, and here's a little something to help you out, just a small gift. And it's a gift that Garak had given to Bashir. And I think that this two-parter is full of little moments of grace like that I think really play to the strong relationship between the characters and the actors.
Yeah, the humanity, if you'll forgive the term, of the characters that are non-Starfleet, non-Federation in DS9 is, I think, what makes them really compelling and us really connect to them, even while they're not necessarily interested in the probity and forthrightness that our, heroic Starfleet characters are. Right. I really love Garrick's initial take on the Boy Who Cried Wolf story, where he's like, "Oh, that kid's clever. That kid's real smart." And then he learns the moralizing, human take on it, and he's like, "Well, then he should have just told different lies."
That's one of the best pieces of writing in the two-parter. Is the way they really give that some time too, and that smugness from Bashir, like, oh, you don't get the moral to this story, and he's like, no, I do. Don't tell the same lie twice. And Bashir's like, oh crap. I mean, like, it's perfect. I mean, it's like when you're writing something and you find that moment where you can have one character who believes something really strongly and another character who believes another one, and they can take the same thing and interpret it differently for their worldview is fantastic. I think that's really fabulous.
I think that Garrick is he's that rare character who becomes more interesting the more that we know. Yeah. Like most often when you've got a mysterious, badass character, when we finally get their backstory or we dive into their history, it takes the mystery and they become less interesting. But Garrick becomes more compelling and tragic the more we learn about him. Have you ever had a character like Garrick in any of your work, or wanted to write a character like that?
It's so hard. I don't know if I've been able to pull it off. In Project 1065, it's a book about a kid who's a spy in the Hitler Youth, and so I do a lot of the spy stuff. And basically the villain of the book is another kid who is German and is being raised by the Hitler Youth essentially. And I tried to get at some nuanced things. The villain, the kid Fritz, is a kid who's been bullied. He himself has been beaten down many, many times, and when Michael, our main character, teaches him to fight back, rather than using that ability to fight back to protect people the way that Michael does, Fritz uses it to hurt other people. He becomes the bully, the way that Nazi Germany largely, and to use a very weak metaphor, became the bully of the world. And so I tried to have a very complicated character there as well, who but I never tried to make him redeemable by the end, the way that they tried to do with Garak. This is a guy who has admittedly tortured people and killed people. We've seen him kill people in the show, sort of just indiscriminately, just be like, well, he deserves to die, And speaking of Intech from the previous episode, I mean, like, he just kills people when he thinks they need killing, and he would have killed Eddington for sure.
Oh man,
I wish he'd been there.
I would have loved to have seen that. Yeah,
and then to take that character and redeem him is really fascinating. In A Stitch in Time, and I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to this book,
please.
but because Robinson wrote it and was so involved in it, Dr. Parmock, who is mentioned in this episode, in one of these two, Tane is saying, do you remember that Dr. Parmock? You interrogated him. You got him to confess without even laying a finger on him.
Right.
And there's this, he's like, he stared at him for like 3 days or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And he says, they're laughing about how he got this guy to confess. In the book, he finds Dr. Parmock again in the ruins of Cardassia after he's gone back. And Parmock is helping victims of the Dominion War.
Huh.
And Parmock recognizes him as the man who tortured him and is able to actually help Garrick with some of Garrick's essentially PTSD, or at least his huge emotional reaction to the devastation of his homeworld.
Yeah.
And it's more of a testament to that character that it's believable that he could meet a former torture victim, and that torture victim could still befriend him in a way. I don't want to make it sound too creepy, like some sort of Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. But Garrick changes. He grows. He changes. But he's still this person who's ruthless when he needs to be. See in The Pale Moonlight, which you've discussed.
Oh yes. Yeah. I think that using Garrick in a story is great because he puts so many of the values that Starfleet takes for granted into that stark relief.
Yes.
He's the ultimate pragmatist because self-interest makes sense. And when the Federation finds itself up to its neck because they were trying to help or intervene in something, he's there to say, well, you don't see this kind of trouble with self-interest.
Right. Yeah. If you just kill him, you'd be done with it.
We see a change take place in him. And just like we'd want to happen in the story, the races of the Bajorian sector begin to see the Federation as a positive force. It's like the famous root beer scene from Way of the Warrior, where Garrick and Quark are talking about how annoying the Federation are, but they're probably the only hope that they have against the Dominion.
Right. And so with Garak, as you pointed out, one of the best things that you can do with a villain is have them challenge the morals of the hero.
Yeah.
Not just be somebody that's hard to kill, but somebody that forces them to make a really difficult decision. And the war does that. The war is the big villain, and the Dominion is the big villain. They force the Federation to make some tough choices. But by having Garak there as the devil on the shoulder of Sisko and other characters throughout the show, saying, look, the easy way out is this. And if you could just set aside your Federation morals for a second, we're done.
And those morals are even fungible just from society to society or race to race. I think so much of DS9 is about the clash of cultures and how different peoples or races don't trust each other, don't understand each other. And in this episode, we get this right out of the gate as Bashir is trying to convince Garrick that Shakespeare is cool. And Garrick's like, I don't think so. This Julius Caesar guy.
How did he not see it coming?
How could he get ganked by somebody right next to him? Yeah. But of course, just like the root beer scene, at the end of Dia's cast, Garrick sees some of the wisdom in Julius Caesar and quotes to Tane that line about the fault being in their stars. Of course, when Cassius says that to Brutus and Julius Caesar, he's saying that it's their fault that Caesar rules over them. But Garrick really means it as, they weren't destined to fail. They overestimated their infallibility. It's a moment of humility.
Yeah.
Yay, illusion.
That did it. Yeah. I really like the Shakespeare references in this one. Obviously, Star Trek beats their Shakespeare references to death over and over and over again.
Yes.
But I thought it was well done, and especially to have an alien race and one that's not claiming credit for it the way the Klingons did.
Yes, right.
But to have an alien race, exploring that and saying, okay, well, I can see a point in this.
Some frank criticism.
Yeah.
Cardassian literature is something that has come up on the show before, and I really wonder what their fiction is like. They discuss it a little bit. I guess I can imagine it being a little bleak and being concerned with duty, like a lot of Russian literature is. But somehow I doubt that Cardassian works would be as darkly comic as a lot of Russian literature is.
No, and aren't we told, and this is me just trying to remember from years ago, but I think we're told that that Cardassian detective novels essentially are much like their court cases. You're guilty. Like, as soon as you're arrested, it's over. Like,
right.
You aren't arrested unless you're guilty, and then it becomes an exploration of why they did it. You know, it's
yes,
like,
right.
I don't know, it's like a reverse Columbo or something where
yes.
You know that you don't know that they did it, but being arrested is tantamount to the decision in the court case already.
Yes.
And,
it's an exploration, perhaps, of the psychology of the perpetrator, like Nabokov's Lolita. Like, it starts with him in jail, but then we go back and examine why he felt he had to do this.
And maybe it's like or maybe it's Kafkaesque in the sense that we're not going to explain why the bureaucracy is there. We don't have a hero who's going to beat it.
Right.
You're just going to watch somebody go through it and suffer.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think Ira Stephen Bear was the one who pioneered the idea of the Cardassian monologue, and which has been described as, people talking like they're in a Russian novel. And I think I've said this on the show before, but even more than Germans or Russians, I think that the Cardassians in a lot of ways embody the idea of Prussian virtues, like the virtues of efficiency and austerity and discipline.
I've always felt like they were supposed to be Nazi Germany, and with the relationship that they have to the Bajorans in particular, who feel very much like the Jewish diaspora, and then finding land again. I've always felt that they were kind of a thinly veiled metaphor for that. And then, as with any race that sticks around long enough in Star Trek, they begin, if they get enough screen time, they grow past that initial thing. The Romulans aren't exactly the Cold War villains that they always were. The Klingons aren't exactly like this feudalistic Japanese warrior. Oh, I guess they became that. At first, they were much more of a sort of just a mustache twirling villains in the old show.
Yeah.
Became more of the way of the warrior kind of thing with their development. The Ferengi, I think, are really very much became a critique of American society, and they were at first just supposed to be, again, whip cracking villains. And I think that Deep Space Nine, I know the Ferengi are played for laughs much of the time, but when you get Quark going back to the homeworld and his mom scolding him for taking his action figure out of the package because it reduced the value of it, his Marauder Mo action figure, I love that.
Yeah.
And that is that's American capitalism that's being critiqued there. Kids buying toys that they don't take out of the box because it's worth more to have it in the box. You know?
Yeah.
And so, again, going off on a tangent, but I think any race that's allowed to stick around long enough can grow past its initial sometimes black and white vision of what they were. But I've always seen them as very much post World War II Germany.
Sure.
But I agree with that sort of Prussian mentality overall.
Yeah. Garrick's inscrutability extends to his sexual orientation. We were talking about the DS9 doc before, and Andy Robinson has maintained for years that Garrick wasn't strictly heterosexual, but it was nice to see him unequivocally repeat that in the documentary.
Yeah. Right. So this was one of the things I wanted to discuss about Garrick in this episode with you.
Sure.
Is he gay? And in the documentary, we have Ira Stephen Bear saying, "Oh, he's absolutely gay." Right? I mean, like, when Robinson puts it a little bit more directly,
yes,
we'll keep the family version of this show. But I feel like he's more bisexual or asexual in a way. So I found an interview with Robinson where he was talking about A Stitch in Time when I was looking up that book to remind myself of it. I read it years ago. But he talks about his sexuality with the character. And this is from well before the documentary, if you'll forgive me for reading this for a second. But I found this. He says, "I started out playing Garak as someone who doesn't have a defined sexuality. He's not gay. He's not straight. it's a non-issue for him. Basically, his sexuality is inclusive. But it's Star Trek, and there were a couple of things working against that. One is that Americans really are very nervous about sexual ambiguity. Also, this is a family show. They have to keep it on the straight and narrow. So then I backed off from it. Right. Originally, in that very first episode, I loved the man's absolute fearlessness about presenting himself to an attractive human being. I think he's talking about Bashir there. Sure. The fact that the attractive human being is a man doesn't make him any difference to him. But that was a little too sophisticated, I think. For the most part, the writers supported the character beautifully. But in that area, they just made a choice. They didn't want to go there. And if they didn't want to go there, I can't, because the writing doesn't support it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, yes, he came in and was just like, I'm going to play this guy as very interested in Bashir and very interested in Zial, or Zial seems to be more interested in him, but they seem to have a relationship toward the end of the show. Not a romantic one necessarily.
Yeah, I never really bought it, and I don't know if it's because they just, Zial was coming in and out, and they didn't know what they wanted to do with the character,
right.
And maybe there was no future in it once they kind of knew what they wanted to do with the character. But also, like, she's like 17 or 18, and Garrick is certainly seasoned, if not old. So it always seemed kind of weird to me.
So maybe we can play it off though as like Zial having a crush on him or interested in him. I don't think
it's the first part of the Thornbirds, not the second part of the Thornbirds.
Right. So I don't think that if I recall, Garrick is very friendly with her and loves her and respects her, but I don't think loves her that way. I don't think they ever show that on screen, at least. But
try telling that to the internet, because I've had a great time seeing the insane mental gymnastics some people online are putting themselves through to try and cope with the fact that they don't like gay people, and the coolest, deadliest character, their favorite character on the show, isn't straight as an arrow, and just the things that they're going through to try to countenance this is incredible.
Wow. Well, I got to admit, and this is probably my naivete to watching it the first time around, I didn't think Garrick was hitting on Bashir. I didn't see that. I mean, now rewatching it, I'm like, oh my gosh, and of course there's a whole lot of subtext here, I guess. I just thought he was just being flamboyant, and I didn't. Again, as he says, the writers didn't give him anything explicitly to work with. And without that, there's no way of knowing it. But to hear the actor say, oh, I was totally playing him gay, so that's interesting. And
in any case, Garrick would underplay it. Even if he was, I mean, he's pansexual, so great, but he's still Garrick, so he's not going to be like, hey, hot stuff. He's going to, just be very subtle about it.
Right, and you've talked a lot on the show about Kirk using his sexuality as a tool.
Yeah.
And you could very easily imagine, and we've seen this in a lot of spy thrillers, movies, and books, about somebody using their sexuality, male or female, to achieve spy goals, intelligence goals. And with Garrick, you can absolutely imagine that he's a person who would, if that's the way he already was bisexual, pansexual, that he would use that as a tool in his arsenal as well.
Yeah. I think that it just reminds me of like I think of like Queen, for instance. Like it's 1981. Queen is the awesomest band ever, and you are rocking out, and then you find out that that Freddie Mercury has AIDS, right, and is bisexual,
you're like, wait, how
and you're
did he
like,
get AIDS?
no, what? No,
he can't be gay.
He's so manly. He has sex with men. That's what. Yes, he's a top for sure. It's just wow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I guess I didn't realize that bothered a lot of people. That's my other naivete, is that
stay off Facebook.
I will. I definitely try to.
Putting Odo and Garrick together is a fun and unlikely pairing. The man of integrity and the man with none, but it pays some real dividends, I think, in this two-parter, just because I like the scene in the runabout where they're challenging each other's philosophies. Mm-hmm. And Garrick tells him basically, hey, you're not that noble. You just don't like disorder and untidiness. So don't try to like judge me.
And you don't care about anybody. Like this isn't emotion for you. It's tying up loose ends. Yeah.
Yeah. And going back to that idea of like cultures clashing on the show, there's a lot of similarities in how Odo and Garrick relate to their cultures. They're both exiles of a kind.
Yes.
They both really want to return and be accepted into their home cultures again. I think this is the first time that we actually hear Odo say out loud that he wants to rejoin the Link.
I'm pretty sure it is. And that's the big reveal of that torture scene is that, Garrick is telling him, you just tell me something, tell me anything that I can take back to Tane. And Odo hears what he's saying and realizes I need to confess something, but Odo is obviously not going to give away any state secrets. He's not going to give them anything super useful. What he will do is he will admit something that nobody else knows. And it will be useless to Tane, but of an incredible opening up. And Garrick realizes this and the fact that he hides it later on. He doesn't tell Tane. When Tane is like, did you get anything out of him? He's like, no. He doesn't even tell Tane what Odo said. Yeah, right. And he doesn't put it in the Starfleet report, which is that nice scene at the end. But when he says like, I want to go home, not to Deep Space Nine. I want to go home to my people. Yeah. And that's a huge revelation in the show. I read that and you're gonna have to help me with his name, Rene Auberjonois. Am I saying that?
That's correct. Yeah.
Close. Oh, well, the one thing I learned from the Deep Space documentary is I've been mispronouncing every single actor.
Yeah.
Nana Visitor and Column. Yeah. It's Column meaning.
Column. Yeah.
I thought it was Column. Anyway, when that actor, when Rene Auberjonois was told, we're going to reveal where you came from, that it's going to be the Founders and the Dominion, he was actually kind of pissed. He was like, if you take that away from me as an actor, if you take away that mystery, I got nothing left. And of course, what he didn't realize is that the writers gave him tons of great stuff from that point on.
Yeah, what if it becomes the whole show, though? What about
became
that?
The whole show, right? Yeah. And he later said that this anecdote was told with him saying, I was so wrong. They gave me so much great stuff to play with. And this moment of revealing this really opens up this whole problem with Odo, that he wants desperately to return to his people, but he can't because of his principles. And yes, this is the brilliant connection that connects Garrick and Odo. Yeah. To me, it's Tane's speech about attacking the Founder homeworld at the end of Improbable Cause that finally draws the real connection between these two characters, between Odo and Garrick. And I love the way it's staged. So Avery Brooks sets up the scene so that, as the director, he sets up the scene so that Tane is talking to Odo in the foreground, face to face, and in the background, in between them, is Garrick. Right? He's out of focus, but he's clear. He's doing that reptilian thing of like flitting back and forth, looking from face to face that he does so well in acting that character. And Tane's telling him about, that you've been separated from your people and that sort of thing. And Garrick in the background, you can just see it in his face, like he has been too. That Garrick wants desperately to be back in the fold of Cardassia. Oh, yeah. And he can't because of his principles. And it's going to keep both of these men on the wrong side of their governments and their worlds for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that belonging and that longing that they both yearn for is interesting. And I think that it's really interesting that as much as we talk about monoculture, I think that the Federation can be seen as a monoculture as well, just a stand-in for Space America. And so if we really want to respect other cultures and, share the galaxy with them, I think you have to respect the fact that they don't want to be a part of you. There's people who are good and that we can admire, who want to be in their own country and don't want to necessarily just assimilate, to our culture necessarily.
Right. Yeah, I guess there's characters like Bosch and TNG. Yeah. I'm trying to think of other humans that we meet who are not a part of Starfleet and not some scientist on a planet, who've got their own mission, but who are just people with, I guess Thomas Riker in a way.
You're forgetting the outrageous Okana.
Oh, Oh, yes. How could I forget the outrageous? Yeah. Now I know how I forgot him. But no, I'm trying to think of those. Yeah, there are a few, but we don't see a lot. It's like
and the Maquis they represent that I think in a lot of ways, but they get demonized because they have to represent, they have to become this third front in the war. But really, most of them are just free settlers who had their land taken away, and they're like, hey, that was our land.
Yeah, the Maquis is a strange name for them. Do you know where that comes from?
Well, it comes from the French Resistance in World War II.
The French Resistance were called the Maquis, and they had a very specific purpose.
Right.
We're going to take down the Nazis and get our country back. And the Maquis, I get it. They're if we take the Nazi metaphor for Cardassia and them encroaching into their settlements, it kind of fits. But then to fight the Federation as well, it's like if the Maquis also fought the Allies. I don't know.
Yeah, hot take. But if this was done today, maybe they would be called ISIS.
Oh, well, maybe I get where you're going though,
or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, anyway, moving on from that. I mean, this episode isn't nearly that deep, but I think there is a sort of repudiation of the idea of unilateral action and secrecy. You've got the Federation, who for the most part is plain dealing, and then you get the two most secretive and powerful organizations in the show, the Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order, and they just say, right, we're going to put a stop to this. Yeah. And they go out there and they just get played and wiped out.
They really get played. And it's a really wonderful moment. And this isn't there since we were just talking about present day terrorism, in the last 20 or 30 years. Yeah. They talk about this a little bit in the documentary, but this is all pre-2001. This is all pre-towers coming down, 9/11. Right. And the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were already active, and Osama bin Laden was being hunted by the Clinton administration. Yeah. There was a terrorist attack against the Twin Towers from the subways in '93, I think it was. So there was already beginning to be a terrorism element. We were starting to see a terrorism of a deep cell kind of thing. And this is where I'm going with this, is that I don't think that the writers of Deep Space Nine had their fingers on that pulse, because I don't think that was a part of the larger American conversation until really the turn of the century. Yeah. But it's incredibly prescient because the Dominion as shapeshifters are playing a long game. And this is to get back to this epic failure. When Lovok says, like, we didn't design this, but when we heard Tane talk about it, we pushed it. Like, we encouraged it. Yeah. And that is some long game crap.
It's opportunist.
That means they have people at the highest levels everywhere who've been embedded for who knows how long. Yeah. And, one of the things that changed about the way that we began to see terrorism in the turn of the century post 9/11 was the terrorists who attacked the Twin Towers were from middle class or upper class families from where they came from. They were well educated. They were not the poor person from the streets of northern Belfast who was going to bomb London because they hate England. These were people who had been trained in Germany and the United States, who'd lived next door to people for years and years and years. And I feel like that makes the Dominion one of the most frightening and scariest villains of any Star Trek show, because unlike the Skrull, who were like, haha, Nixon, I got close enough to punch you in the face. Oh, but Captain America stopped me. Unlike the Skrull, who were just kind of like infiltrate to punch you in the face, these guys they're working into the Federation society, into the Romulan society, into Cardassian, and they're nudging history
and doing brain surgery on Sisko.
Oh, God, yeah.
If you're the changeling Bashir, why not just let him die on the table and there goes the emissary, but instead, just fulfilling that role.
I know, and so that wasn't part of the mission then, to kill Sisko, right? I mean, it in fact makes him trust Bashir even more, the changeling Bashir. I mean, it's some creepy stuff. And I think that it's in that moment when Tane and Garak are on the bridge, and there's that oh crap moment of we've been fooled. It's like, wow, this is some deep infiltration they've done on us if they got us that bad.
Now I'm thinking that the Maquis are maybe the Mujahideen, but that's maybe too spicy.
Okay, no, that's an interesting hot take. I'll take that one.
It's more like, we'll fight whoever's in here, and if it's the Dominion or the Cardassians, fine. But now Starfleet wants some. Yeah, right. I
get you. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's so interesting to rewatch Deep Space Nine with a modern eye. Mm-hmm. It's impossible to watch it without the last 20 years of history to process with it. Yeah. And I think it makes it even more watchable. It in a way that some of the Cold War stuff has really fallen away from TNG and TOS.
Yeah. And as much as this episode seems to sort of castigate, operating on your own, Sisko himself takes it upon himself to try to intervene in this for good reasons. And he gets a slap on the wrist, which is fine. But I can't help but feel he also gets a little wink, too. I can't help but feel...
I don't know whether to court-martial you or promote you.
Yeah, and I think that his decisive actions probably lead to his promotion to captain a few episodes later.
Yeah, I did write down a question as I was rewatching this. I was like, so is taking the Defiant into the Gamma Quadrant to go and rescue Odo really a good idea? Like, this seems like a really, really bad decision. I understand they all love Odo, and I understand that he's a valuable member of their family. But seriously, taking the Defiant and leaving Deep Space Nine unguarded. I know tomorrow there's going to be 10 ships or something, but... Right. But like to go into the Gamma Quadrant after one guy, it's a very Star Trek thing.
Yeah,
it's one of those eye rollers where you're like, and no, you don't have to volunteer if you don't want to. And of course, every single person's on the bridge.
Right? Of course,
yeah. Because and so that's the least. Like in two episodes of lots of surprises, that's some cliche, unsurprising stuff.
There's a lot of volunteering in this episode because Garak keeps showing up to be like, hey, let's go find this guy. It's like, why do you want to do it? Like, this is my job. But he wants to be there to see what happens.
And Odo volunteers. Once Odo has cleared the mystery, you blow up your own shop. Right?
You're done.
And Odo's done. But then he tells Garak, oh, no, I'm with you for the rest of this. And yes, Odo's been told by his Deep Throat character that there's a bigger puzzle to solve. And as Garak points out, he hates loose ends.
Right.
But it still does seem like he's volunteering to help this guy out. There's a lot of volunteering in these episodes.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the weakest parts of it. Clearly in the second episode, they need the Defiant there to rescue them in the end.
Yeah.
But we can't have them show up and mess with the resolution. So we've got to slow them down with Eddington. And then once they get there, we can have them boom, 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 blow up a few Jem'Hadar ships and get out. I don't know. That part of this one always felt a little light to me. Like not the best part of this episode.
Yeah, but I mean, the good parts wouldn't have fit into one episode. So
exactly. It's too much for one episode, and maybe a too little in the good parts. For two, for one episode. So for two. And it really brings we got to have the cast in there. The rest of the cast. We might have one episode that can be almost all Odo and Garak, but to have two would be a lot.
Yeah, no Quark in this episode, which is rare.
Yeah, he's usually the sort of the heartbeat of the show, and everyone comes to Quark's.
Yeah.
Apparently there was a scene where Odo goes to him to get his lead basically on the perfume assassin.
Okay.
They got cut from the episodes.
Okay. Yeah.
But you'd think with all the extra time they could have put it back in, but
yeah. I guess not. Anything else that you can think of that we haven't put into this episode?
Not a lot. I did have the terrorism, the torture scene. Is an incredible scene. I'm generally not a fan of torture scenes in fiction. In real life, torture is an incredibly ineffective way to get information out of somebody, and has been condemned, by the United Nations and by a lot of humanitarian organizations. And so I try personally not to write torture scenes. I don't even like it in a cop show where the cop gets rough with a
the phone book,
not a witness but an informant, just to get a little bit of information out of them, because I feel like that's
romanticizes it.
Yeah. It does romanticize it. It makes us think, oh, all you got to do is hit a person with a rubber hose a few times and you're going to stop a terrorist attack. And we know that's not the case. Yeah. And there have been the There Are Four Lights episodes in TNG are incredible. Yeah. The David Warner stuff, those are amazing. But again, it's 2 episodes of a person being tortured. There's the great torture scene in Firefly, where in Princess Bride. I mean, there's all kinds of scenes of torture in iconic TV and film. Sometimes played like Princess Bride and Firefly. Like, now let's see what kind of person you are when I torture you. There's no goal other than torturing.
Yeah.
Or getting information out of somebody. The number of times Batman beats somebody up to get information out of them in comics and film and stuff is incredible. Yeah. So anyway, I both love that scene and hate it, if that makes any sense. I think it's an incredibly powerful scene, but I'm in general not a fan of torture scenes, and I wish that we could have fewer of those, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. And I mean, despite like how horrible it is, it's also, I think the show is very effective in showing something that is almost completely esoteric, because the way this guy is being tortured is they've got this positronic thing on or whatever, and he's flaky, they just make him flaky.
Like, what a Star Trek way to torture somebody.
Yeah.
There's
I mean, it's not knives. There's no bamboo. But it's still, we feel, thanks to the staging and the performance of the actors, we feel like this horrible thing. And then I love when he finally turns it off and Odo just face plants into the bucket.
And I did like the little detail of all the little flakes of him collecting back up into the bucket. I thought that was very nice.
Some great CG work.
I did have a question. The thing that they build looks like what was that board game that had a volcano? Rock? Okay. What was it? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It feels like they just set up this elaborate board game, this mousetrap-like board game.
Right.
Like these three Romulans come in and piece it together, and then he pushes the button. Look, I know he can't shapeshift, but the guy Ogo could walk over and just kick that thing off.
Just knock it over.
Right? Like just, and then once you're free of the binding field or whatever, go to town and kill everybody. Seep under the carpet. I don't know. Yeah. But it's one of those refrigerator questions that Hitchcock used to say, like after the fact, when you're at the refrigerator, you're like, wait. But if you don't think of it in the episode, then it's okay. But
yeah. And Rene Auberjonois is, just the entire portrayal of Odo, he's got this voice that's kind of like that. I can't imagine doing that all day.
Oh, I know.
But the way that he employs his instrument in this episode just to make Odo seem literally on the verge of discorporation is just great.
Yeah, he's like shaking. Again, another nice detail from the costuming people is that his uniform is flaking off because it's all him. Like he's not even wearing clothes. It's all him. Yeah. And I think that's a really neat reminder. I like when they do things like that. So I guess the other thing I wanted to bring up is that, of course, this is for an episode that was not intended to be a 2-parter, but then was. This becomes a fundamental turning point for the whole series, and we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. With the change with the beard and everything. But seriously, from now, when they're sitting at the table talking to Todman, and they say, this is going to start a war. It does. Yeah. And this is now the Dominion War, and not just the Cold War that had been played out before this, but this episode is a turning point for the entire series because the gauntlet has been thrown. The die
kick the hornet's nest. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Federation might not be involved yet, but it's only a matter of time. And again, if the Federation is America in space, this is World War II, and America is sitting out while the major powers in Europe are fighting, and it's only a matter of time until we get dragged in. It's only a few episodes from now that Worf shows up, I think, and the Klingons in force. No, yeah, Worf isn't here yet. Yeah.
No, but it'll be after Odo kills the other changeling, and then it's another kind of hornet's nest. So
right. So anyway, I love the episode because of Garrick and Odo, but they also really kick off what we all know to be a really fascinating 2.5 years of television.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now that we've reached the end of our discussion, you'll receive a promotion for your continued service to the rank of full lieutenant. And the last time that you were here, you requested a transfer to the holodeck programming department to create scenarios where the crew can blow off steam. What kind of holo programs are you developing?
Well, there's some stuff for Riker I can't really talk about.
Fair enough.
But I like the interactive novels. So I like the ones where you can go in and be somebody else.
Sure.
The spy thrillers, Our Man Bashir.
Yes.
I love creating those for the crew to blow off a little bit of steam.
Yeah.
And of course, the calisthenic programs, kill the demon, kill Skeletor over and over again, has always been popular among our more warlike crew members. But basically the novels where the Federation, the straight up Federation types get to go in and be morally ambiguous. Those are very popular.
Yeah, I can see that. I've been watching a lot of Voyager lately, and I've been watching Catherine Janeway spend her free time being a governess, and it makes me wonder a couple of things. One of those things is this really how, is this like a powerful businessman who then goes and like pays a lady to like whip him or something like that? Does she want to let go of the authority and have kids yell at her? Right. And then also, did they really do this in their free time? And then also, we never see anybody not doing a good job. Like, if anybody would do a bad job, it would be, Harry Kim. And he goes and he plays Beowulf in his Beowulf program, but he's like, I am Beowulf. And you never see that guy go in and go, Beowulf, you must save us. Okay, I'm going to help you. They're not playing it right, or they're making kind of lousy choices. Like we've all been at a role playing table and had like that one player that's like, oh, why'd you do that? Don't do that.
or the choose your own adventure where you deliberately choose the wrong path.
Yeah, right. Yes.
It's clear the author wants you to go a certain direction. You're like, no. Or when you play through a video game for the 4th time and you're like, I'm going to do all the things you're not supposed to do.
Right. Yeah.
That would be fun. Maybe the holodeck hasn't been around long enough for them to.
That's something else, because when Picard sees it in Farpoint, he is just floored. And
he's like, wow, this is amazeballs. Yeah.
Yeah. Fast forward, 10, 12 years to Voyager, and everybody is really good at the game, and they're all apparently great actors. Just civilians, because military people are just fantastic actors.
Yeah. Not to mention that in all of our prequel shows, they keep bringing up holographic stuff, and it's like, guys, this was a TNG thing. Come on.
Yes.
But but we still get my favorite line from Enterprise is when they take the Klingons into a holodeck and they show them Kronos, and the guy says, "I think I can see my house from here." It's my favorite line in Enterprise.
Boy, so underrated.
I don't know if I'm going to change positions on the ship. Maybe I'll go into in the intelligence service. Maybe I'll try and be in Starfleet intelligence now. It'd be Right. Yeah.
There's the tradition of, the honey trap or the agent or operative that you send to sort of absorb information from somebody who doesn't know. You could have a whole thing where somebody's in a holodeck program and then a real life person comes in and pretends to be a holographic character and get some pillow talk from them or something.
Yeah. What's your password? What's your Gmail password?
Right. Yeah.
It's just it's just a holodeck program.
This is part of the game. For the game to go on, I'm going to need your credit card info.
And your Netflix password.
Yeah. Lieutenant Gratz, thanks for once again joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
I am on both Facebook and Twitter under my name, Alan Gratz. It's ALANGRATZ. And I also have my own website, www.alangratz.com.
Awesome. And where can people find your work and pre-order their copy of Allies?
Oh, yes, at good bookstores anywhere. I'm on Amazon. I'm on Barnes & Noble. I'm at your local independent bookseller, which is where I would prefer that you buy it because I love independent bookstores and would like to support them.
Yes.
But wherever finer books are sold, except for Target. I'm not in Target yet.
Okay. No, is that some kind of negotiation that has to happen?
Target is very particular, and we're working on them.
Okay, well, I mean, I think I've seen Captain Underpants, so I think that you deserve to be there.
I thank you. I appreciate it. You live close to the headquarters of Target, I think. Go in there and talk to them for me. I'd appreciate that.
I will. I know people. I've worked at Target myself.
There you go. See?
Yeah, I'll work my contacts there.
I appreciate that.
Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks a lot. I've had a great time.
Me too. We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.